He don't want easy fight. He wants the big boys. He wants the guys that are going to challenge him and going to bring danger. He wants to prove to people that he's the best. And he will prove it, and he will look badass.
Just responded to Benavidez, and boxing fans are losing it. Oleksandr Usyk says he's ready for any challenge. Even David Benavidez, the heavyweight king, looked calm, but his message was crystal clear. If this fight happens, it could shake the entire boxing world.
Usyk was undisputed in the cruiserweight division before coming up to the heavyweight division and becoming undisputed there. So the thing is, does Benavidez want to go up to heavyweight, go up even more in weight, which he already did 25 pounds to go up to cruiserweight, and then go up more to meet Usyk there? Or will Usyk be coming down to cruiserweight?
Oleksandr Usyk just responded to David Benavidez, and boxing fans are absolutely losing their minds. Usyk made it clear that he's ready for any challenge that comes his way. Even Benavidez, one of boxing's most dangerous champions, looked calm and confident, but the message behind his words was impossible to ignore. If this fight actually becomes reality, it could send shockwaves through the entire boxing world. Benavidez has already dominated divisions before, while Usyk became undisputed at cruiserweight, and then moved all the way up to heavyweight to conquer that division too. Now the big question is whether Benavidez would be willing to climb even higher in weight after already making major jumps during his career, or if Usyk would actually consider coming back down to cruiserweight for a showdown that feels almost unreal. That's the strange thing about boxing. Sometimes a single interview can feel more intense and dangerous than the fight itself. Because right after Benavidez began publicly calling out Usyk following the Zurdo Ramirez fight, Usyk responded in a way that didn't sound like normal promotion at all. It sounded more like a warning from a man who genuinely enjoys chaos and pressure. Did Benavidez just challenge the one fighter nobody in boxing should ever provoke? And what exactly did Usyk say that suddenly made boxing fans everywhere feel nervous about what could happen next?
Fight is one of the biggest fights of this decade right now. Take it while it's hot. Don't play with them, and don't let them play with you. It is not smart for David Benavidez to give Jai Patai a shot at his name right now because he's hot right now. You go up and fight Usyk while you're hot, and it makes sense. You can always come back down and fight Patai if you want to. You understand? If you lost to Usyk, Patai fight still there. If you lose to Patai, Usyk fight gone. So be smart about this thing. Go take Usyk.
I said after the fight this past Saturday, after I witnessed what David Benavidez did, I said that I'd pick David Benavidez to beat most heavyweights. Not all, but most. And definitely not Usyk. Would I like to see it? Yeah, but there's fights that I like to see a lot more. For example, Bivol at 175, Jai Apataya. So would I like to see him move up to heavyweight to fight Usyk? Yeah, I think it would be fun. I think it would be a fun fight to make. But I would much rather see him fight Bivol or Jai.
Nobody expected the conversation to escalate this fast after such a dominant victory, because in boxing, fighters are usually still absorbing the emotion and chaos that comes with a massive win, while the internet is already rewriting their future for them, pushing them into completely different weight classes, and matching them against dangerous new opponents they have barely even had time to think about, let alone fully prepare themselves to face inside the ring.
They're going to win on that one for sure, but I got to say, the way Benavidez is looking, I think that got to lean towards him.
He could do, think about, hold on, wait, what did I just hear? Yeah. Think about what we just said on this show. And guys, it's with the caveat that he had the right guy in front of him, right? Zurdo at cruiserweight. Yeah. But I have said so far in this show that Benavidez has to be in the conversation, considering he did it at 200 pounds, for fastest combination puncher of all time. Mm-hmm. Devin is saying that's a hell of a fight, him and Usyk. Teo just came out and said he'd lean Benavidez against the heavyweight champ.
And also, Usyk is turning 40 next year?
Yeah, he's 38.
That matters. Okay, 38, 39, 40, that's close. That's 40 years old, that matters. And the speed thing, Usyk's always fighting guys he's fast.
But right after David Benavidez left absolutely no doubts with his latest performance against Gilberto Ramirez, something unusual suddenly disrupted the normal rhythm of boxing politics. Instead of the typical list of familiar names floating around the super middleweight or light heavyweight divisions, his camp began pushing a conversation that sounded less like a realistic matchup and more like a direct challenge to reality itself. They started talking about Oleksandr Usyk.
To fight Oleksandr Usyk in 2027 for the heavyweight championship of the world. That is an absolutely insane fight. I know David Benavidez is very big and very fast, and Usyk is small for a heavyweight in the modern times, But I know David Benavidez just did the jump from light heavyweight to cruiserweight. But the fact that he was a light heavyweight at all, and before that he was 168, jumping all the way to heavyweight, like that's Roy Jones shit. I could see him jumping to heavyweight and fighting like a less.
Believe it or not, there are actually people out there who think David Benavidez could beat Oleksandr Usyk, and honestly, that sounds completely insane right now. Sure, Benavidez is an incredible fighter, nobody is denying that, but at this stage of his career, he has only recently settled into cruiserweight and still has massive fights waiting for him against names like Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol, which are the matchups boxing fans genuinely want to see first. The reality is that Benavidez probably is fearless enough to take a challenge like Usyk, but right now, stepping into the heavyweight division against someone at that level could easily become a disastrous mistake. Meanwhile, Usyk already has his own dangerous business waiting for him at heavyweight with possible fights against rising threats and established contenders that make far more sense at this moment in time. One thing worth mentioning, though, is that David himself previously said it could take around 5 years before he fully moves up to heavyweight. But with massive money now floating around boxing and powerful figures pushing impossible fights into reality, the timing suddenly made the entire conversation feel strangely believable. Benavidez had just reminded everyone once again why people see him as a nightmare across multiple divisions, and instead of calmly focusing on belts, rankings, and mandatory challengers, his team started looking upward toward the heavyweight division, where the fighters are larger, the punches hit differently, and even the smallest mistake can instantly end everything. And that is where Usyk enters the picture. A fighter who completely changed what dominance in modern boxing looks like. He unified the cruiserweight division, moved into heavyweight, and instead of barely surviving against naturally bigger men, he completely outclassed giants who were supposed to be too strong, too powerful, and too experienced for anyone moving up from smaller weight classes. So when Benavidez's name started getting linked to Usyk after the big victory, some people laughed it off while others noticed something more serious. The confidence behind the call-out did not feel random or emotional. It sounded calculated, almost like a long-term plan that suddenly became public far earlier than expected. Then came Usyk's response, or more accurately, the silence before it, because Usyk does not behave like most fighters in boxing. He does not chase headlines, force trash talk, or jump into public arguments just to keep attention on himself. But when he finally does speak, even the calmest words somehow land with far more weight than anyone expects.
What I seen last weekend, David Benavidez beats Oleksandr Usyk at heavyweight. Believe it or not, there are people that actually believe that David Benavidez beats Usyk, and it's like, bro, that's simply just crazy talk. I mean, I get it, Benavidez is a great fighter, but as of right now, he just got the cruiserweight, hasn't fought Alpataya yet, hasn't fought Bivol, hasn't fought Beterbiev, fights that we actually want to see. And the thing is, I do think Benavidez is crazy enough to take on that challenge against Usyk, but as of right now, that would be a huge mistake for him. Truthfully, Usyk already has his own battles to take care of at heavyweight, taking on guys like Callout, Wardley, Itama. Those are all way more realistic fights for him right now. One thing to mention though is the fact that David already said it's going to be about 5 years before he goes to heavyweight. But the thing is, with Turkey involved, adding a lot.
In this situation, what made everything feel even more intense was how long Oleksandr Usyk chose to say absolutely nothing at all. While David Benavidez slowly became part of heavyweight conversations across the boxing world, Usyk was already locked into something far more immediate and dangerous. His full attention was consumed by preparations for a massive showdown against Rico Verhoeven in a huge spectacle expected to take place near the pyramids in Egypt, a crossover event combining combat sports pressure, worldwide attention, and one of the most historic backdrops imaginable. For Usyk, this was never the moment for unnecessary distractions. Every ounce of his focus was tied to an opponent capable of bringing a completely different kind of danger into the ring. And that explains why his reaction to the Benavidez discussions initially felt more like silence than engagement. But silence in boxing is never truly empty. Most of the time, it signals calculation. While fans argued online about whether Benavidez could realistically handle Usyk's pressure, movement, and relentless output, people close to the situation described Usyk as the type of fighter who overwhelms opponents not only physically, but mentally as well, slowly breaking their rhythm until the entire fight turns from strategy into pure survival. And they were not shy about where they believed boxing was heading next. According to them, the traditional list of challengers was already beginning to feel exhausted. The familiar names were no longer enough to satisfy the ambition growing inside their camp. In their eyes, this was no longer just about collecting belts or defending titles. It was about chasing a level of legacy so massive that it forces boxing conversations far beyond the limits of normal weight divisions.
Usyk, you don't know how to see Battalion unless he want to come to heavyweight. Now he can go super middleweight, light heavyweight, cruiser heavy. Why would you play with a guy who's just as dangerous as Usyk, not as known as Usyk, not going to bring you as much money as Usyk, when you can just go straight to Usyk? That's kind of crazy. In a boxing ring with those 10-ounce gloves on, anything can happen. And that's my words to David Benavidez, because I know he listens to me. He looks up to me, thinks a lot of me. I'm going to tell him it's okay to say no, Patai. You haven't proved.
That is where the entire conversation became even more controversial, because the moment people start talking about legacy, comparisons are always going to follow close behind. Naturally, the discussion slowly shifted toward names like Canelo Alvarez, and whether this new generation of rising champions is beginning to redefine what being the true face of boxing actually means in the modern era. Some fans heard the confidence coming from a camp and viewed it as pure disrespect, while others saw it very differently, interpreting it as the natural mindset of a fighter who feels like he has already outgrown his current environment and is now searching for challenges big enough to match his ambition. But boxing has never been a sport that rewards ambition alone. It tests it in the harshest ways possible. And what makes the conversation around Oleksandr Usyk so complicated is not simply the issue of size, but the terrifying combination of timing, experience, and skill that comes with facing someone operating at that level.
Cheeky, chill. Usyk is bigger than Benavidez. Usyk will not stand in front of Benavidez and take all those combos. Is a great counterpuncher. Elite footwork. Will literally keep distance controls and counter Benavidez all night until he gets TKO like the ball.
Usyk.
Probably like about a 10%.
It's not zero.
It's not zero. Yeah, it's a higher percentage than Canelo. To be honest with you, so
I was gonna get to him.
Usyk definitely in the future, But first things first, Usyk is I give my respects to him. He's an all-time legend, and it would be an honor.
On the other side of the debate, critics continue pointing toward the obvious reality that heavyweight boxing is not just a simple extension of the lower weight divisions. It is an entirely different ecosystem where one small mistake can instantly erase several rounds of hard-earned success and completely change the outcome of a fight in seconds. Even highly respected voices within the boxing industry have already started weighing in on the situation, and the reactions coming from them have been mixed, cautious, and far from fully convinced.
If he were to retire and the belts got split up, he could pick one of those off. But fighting Oleksandr Usyk, I don't care what age he is. If you give Oleksandr Usyk all of the advantages he already has, plus now he's not the massively smaller man, I don't see David Benavidez as great as I think he is. We have weight classes for a reason. And I don't see him really standing a chance there. And maybe if this is next year, maybe Oleksandr Usyk ages and he just falls off a cliff. I mean, if he does it, that's some all-time.
At the same time, he also admitted something extremely important. Fighters like David Benavidez are not normal challengers stepping into the ring without real danger attached to them. They bring an aggressive style and relentless pressure that can create serious problems even for the most established champions, especially fighters who depend heavily on timing, movement, and distance control to dominate opponents. And that is exactly where the debate started becoming far more interesting, because boxing fans are almost as obsessed with theoretical matchups as they are with actual fights becoming reality. Once the conversation exploded across social media platforms and boxing forums, the reaction immediately split into two completely different narratives. One side believes that entering Oleksandr Usyk's world too early would be an enormous career risk capable of destroying years of carefully built momentum and progress. The other side argues that avoiding elite-level challenges completely defeats the purpose of being labeled a special fighter in the first place. Then the discussion moved into a more analytical direction as commentators began breaking down the logic behind crossover success by using comparisons, historical examples, and past fights involving elite champions moving between divisions. But while the boxing world keeps building fantasy matchups around his name, Usyk himself is not sitting around waiting for hypothetical fights to become reality. His focus remains locked on the immediate challenges directly in front of him, and the intensity of his preparation for major upcoming events continues to show a fighter who is still fully committed to active dominance rather than slowing down for legacy exhibitions or spectacle alone.
Yesterday, we see Turki Al-Sheikh tell his Ring magazine outlet that he's interested in you versus Usyk. What do you think of that?
As of me, for having a competitive spirit, definitely does interest me. You know, like I said, at the end of the day, you don't know what's possible until you make it possible. You know what I mean? And a lot of people think I can't beat Usyk, but if I really put my mind into it and, you know, train for maybe like a year, because I barely came up to cruiserweight, I can't just go up to heavyweight like that. But if I train myself and I prepare myself, I could beat anybody in the world. But I'm never going to say never, because maybe in the future when I'm like 35, we could go up to heavyweight, but right now I'm really just taking care of the cruiserweight.
At one point, when asked about future possibilities, even David Benavidez acknowledged reality in a surprisingly calm and grounded manner. He admitted that while the idea of eventually facing Oleksandr Usyk is definitely intriguing, there are still several major steps that need to happen before that conversation can realistically become practical. He openly spoke about first testing himself against other elite-level fighters, including dangerous names like Dmitry Bivol and Artur Beterbiev, fully recognizing that those matchups would ultimately determine whether the dominance he currently shows in his division can genuinely carry upward against even greater levels of competition.
Has just become the unified cruiserweight champion of the world, and now we're talking about a super matchup in the heavyweight division? Boxers going crazy. Now, David has a long list of potential matchups in the light heavyweight division, such as your Artur Beterbiev and of course Dmitry Bivol. And in the cruiserweight division, none other than the man himself, Jai Pataya. But a showdown against Oleksandr Usyk, don't get me wrong guys, it's intriguing, but did I opt for this? Nah. As for Oleksandr Usyk, there's other matchups that I need to see him take on first. I mean the winner between Dubois versus Fabio Wally, or even Ajay Kabayel. But if Turki Al-Sheikh wants a matchup, most of the time, he gets it done. And don't get me wrong guys, if this ever materializes in 2027, it will draw eyes from all over.
Meanwhile, analysts continued debating the hypothetical matchup using everything from detailed technical breakdowns to statistical comparisons that tried to make sense of a fight that does not even exist yet. Some even pulled analogies from past boxing eras, arguing that in rare cases styles can overcome size differences when timing, accuracy, and ring IQ all align perfectly in the right moment. But others were quick to dismiss that idea entirely, pointing out that heavyweight boxing tends to ignore romantic theories once real punches start landing and physics takes over. Then came the most intriguing twist in the entire discussion. An industry leak suggested that high-level figures, including powerful financial stakeholders within boxing, are already fully aware of the commercial magnitude such a matchup could generate. Reports circulating through insider circles hinted that long-term planning conversations may eventually position a cross-divisional spectacle involving these names somewhere around the 2027 timeline, depending entirely on how both fighters evolve, progress, and continue to dominate their respective paths in the years ahead. And that kind of timeline changes everything because it shifts the entire discussion from immediate fantasy into a long-term possibility that actually feels mapped out rather than random speculation. It also helps explain why neither fighter is rushing toward it right now. Oleksandr Usyk has immediate obligations that demand total focus and discipline, while David Benavidez is still in the process of building the kind of heavyweight credibility required to make a leap of that magnitude feel legitimate in competitive terms, not just promotional hype. And yet, despite all logic pointing toward patience and gradual progression, boxing fans rarely operate on patience. They operate on curiosity, speculation, and imagination. They want to know what happens when relentless pressure meets elite-level control. They want to see whether volume punching can truly disrupt precision at the highest level of the sport. They want to understand if size, timing, and skill can ever actually balance out when both fighters refuse to break under pressure. That is exactly why this conversation refuses to disappear from boxing discourse. Because underneath all the analysis, predictions, and promotional strategy, there is still one simple idea constantly pulling everything forward. What actually happens if David Benavidez steps into the ring with Oleksandr Usyk at the absolute peak of their powers? Until that question is answered inside an actual ring, every warning, every call-out, every rumor, and every moment of silence will continue to feel like the opening chapter of something much larger than a standard boxing matchup. And right now, boxing is doing exactly what it always does when it senses something dangerous and exciting arriving at the same time. It is watching closely, waiting for clarity, and arguing loudly across every platform while the fighters themselves continue moving quietly toward what feels like an inevitable collision. And while the boxing world keeps debating in circles, the real story keeps unfolding away from microphones, headlines, and social media noise, where timing matters more than opinions and patience can be just as powerful as any punch. Oleksandr Usyk remains locked into his immediate priorities, fully aware that every fight at this stage of his career carries a completely different kind of pressure. At this level, it is no longer about proving raw talent, but about protecting and preserving control over a legacy that already sits among the most respected in modern boxing history. That is why every decision around his next move is calculated, almost surgical in its precision, with nothing left to chance. Meanwhile, David Benavidez is operating in an entirely different current, one driven by momentum, ambition, and rising expectation. His climb across multiple divisions has created a rare situation where confidence is no longer just personal belief, but a public demand from fans who now expect him to keep pushing upward. People are no longer simply asking whether he can dominate his current weight class, but how far he is willing to stretch that dominance before the natural limits of size, power, and elite opposition finally begin to appear.
Usyk is done with the kickboxer, assuming he wins, which, be crazy if he didn't. Who is Usyk's next opponent? So I made a list of Usyk's possible next opponents. So first, we have David Benavidez. I don't think this is as likely as a lot of people seem to think. David Benavidez just had his first fight at cruiserweight. He's probably going to move back down the other way. There's more good fights for him there that he would be more favorited in. Against Bivol, that's a top 10 pound-for-pound matchup. Against Beterbiev, I don't think David Benavidez...
That contrast is exactly what keeps this entire conversation alive, because it is not simply about a potential fight, but about a collision between two completely different timelines in boxing. One fighter is defending and extending a completed legacy that is already written into the sport's modern history, while the other is still in the active process of building his own legacy in real time, step by step, fight by fight. And somewhere between those two realities sits an uncomfortable truth that boxing has always followed. It never rushes greatness, even when the entire audience is demanding it at full volume. It waits until both fighters have been tested enough, exposed enough, and proven enough to justify the moment when everything finally comes together. So for now, the idea of Oleksandr Usyk versus David Benavidez remains suspended in that rare space between pure speculation and something that feels almost inevitable, where every victory, every public silence, every call-out, and every passing interview quietly adds another layer of weight to a fight that may still be far away on the calendar, but is already very real in the way boxing fans talk about it. Imagine it, and argue over it as if it could happen at any moment.